Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the question of civilization as we still consider our history of civilization. What makes a civilization? We look at past history and we begin looking at hunter-gatherer groups where we had groups of people that were living together. Man is a social animal, and when I say animal, I'm not saying anything about its origins. I'm not denying that man is made in the image of God. I'm just saying that we are creatures, and early on we look at human society begin to develop within that social framework, and people were, for food they were hunting, they were gathering, and if you're hunting and gathering, you're having to hunt those animals, and after a while the animals sort of get wise to you and they move away, and so you have to go and follow them. And if you're gathering, I might gather apples from this tree or berries from that bush, and tomorrow they're not there because I already gathered them. So now I have to go further and further afield, and it can be a difficult lifestyle because I'm spending all of my time hunting and gathering and just seeking enough to sustain a living. But then there's going to be a transition as we start to move in the direction of civilization, of pastoral societies. That is the idea of farming, of having animals instead of going out and hunting them, of actually raising animals and subduing animals and ruling over animals in sort of a localized sense, and maybe having herds of animals so that I don't have to go out and hunt for them. I've got them all in my nice corral or in keeping where I can use them for shearing. If it's sheep, I can shear them and learn to use the wool. If it's for food, I can raise them and then not kill them all off at once because I'm going to be out of animals, but then raise them gradually and use them as needed. Or I can farm the land and grow the land, and that will allow me to not just feed myself, but allow me to feed a larger population. Now, as we move that pastoral society, there's going to tend to be some folks that are in charge, the chief maybe of the family or of the tribe, and then the not chief, the commoner, and so we're going to have begin to have various strata of society within that framework. Next, we move from the chief and the commoner to the idea of the growth of kingdoms, where instead of a chief, now he's maybe a bigger chief. Maybe he's actually got a city, or not just a city, maybe even a collection of cities. But he has people. Not just everybody's on the same level. There might be somebody who's still owns some property or has some clout. He's maybe a noble, and then you go down the line to the freeman, and finally the serf and the slave. And we look at the serf and the slave, and they almost look like in their culture, in most ancient cultures, I'm going to have a dichotomy, a distinction between those two. And notice that slavery is a very early form within society, and it's just about universally practiced throughout all of the ancient societies. I go from kingdoms now to civilizations, and that's going to mandate a complex social hierarchy. For example, in this photo, I'm standing next to the Great Pyramid at Giza. That's not going to be something that you just build when you're hunting and gathering, or even a pastoral society, or even a kingdom. That's going to take a great degree of social hierarchy, of social mobilization. Thousands and thousands of workers, and they have to be maybe coerced or convinced at least to do that work, and they also have to be fed while they're doing it, because that means that they're not farming, and that bespeaks a certain level of organization. And these civilizations, not only is there a complex social hierarchy, there's an economy that's needed for that. There needs to be some people that are involved in farming and some people that are involved in other strata of society, and that they're all working together to form a civilization. Now, involved in that, one of the things that we're going to see is some sort of record keeping. Usually, in fact almost always, alphabetic writing of some sort. Now, there will be an exception, and we'll mention that later on when we get to the Incas. But nearly every ancient or modern civilization has some sort of record keeping, which will usually involve some sort of writing. Now, yes, it's true we're going to talk about hieroglyphs versus cuneiform, but even hieroglyphs and cuneiform are going to be used in an alphabetic sort of way eventually. And so there's record keeping for the purpose of writing down laws, of debts and payments, and establishing an economy. There will be eventually advanced technology, where I'm going to have technology in building. What's pictured here is technology in warfare. You begin with, maybe I'm going to use a rock to hit somebody over the head with, and then instead of just having a rock, I can actually attach my rock to a stick. I can just extend my reach, and then I go from there to a bow and arrow. I don't have to stand next to the person. I can shoot him from a distance, or as pictured here, the mobilization of military units by the use of some sort of mobile device like a chariot, which will be another advancement in the technology of the military in this case. Now, my earliest civilizations is really going to begin, I believe, in Sumer. If you talk to a Egyptologist, he'll say no, it begins in Egypt. These two are going to be both very, very early, but I'm going to stick with Sumer as I think being just slightly earlier, and yet perhaps advanced and surpassed, maybe even very quickly, by the civilization of Egypt. So these two areas, both located within the Middle East, will be two of my earliest civilizations, followed shortly by India and also China. And then a bit later, we're going to see civilization really come to Europe. Europe is going to be trailing these other locations, which will have earlier seen a much higher degree of civilization. But eventually Europe, and even before the Americas are discovered by the Europeans, they're already discovered by other peoples. So I have what we notice as the Aztecs and the Incas, and eventually, even though I had some civilization there earlier, the Mayans, when we think of them, that's quite a bit later. And yet there had been an earlier people group that had done a great deal of building and perhaps civilization even earlier. So that's the realm that we're going to be looking at. And for the purposes of these classes, I'm going to be focusing mostly upon Europe and the Middle East. So here's where we're going to be, mostly Europe and the Middle East. We'll start in Sumer, we'll move to Egypt, and then we'll move around the Middle East, and eventually, much later, we'll get over to European civilization and see what happens there to make the Europeans eventually a world-dominating power.